how do you think the best, or what do you think the best approach is to motivating people to, on their own accord, um, look at and adopt the tenets that are being put in place for
Right.
organizations in their codes of ethics?
Well, the kinds of things that you're doing, Larry and Bill Nielsen and others are doing, the Arthur Page Center as well as the society, are encouraging this, putting up standards, goals, acceptable rules of behavior or acceptable modes of behavior. Ethics are enforced at the legal government level, right here in Washington. They're always telling lobbyists, and I have been one in the past, lobbyists what the ethical rules are, and those are regimented, regulated, and punished for those who step over the line. They're fined or disallowed from practicing. In public relations and in corporate communications, the idea for me is to set the standard, show what behavior is rewarded, and point up the egregious failings when those occur, and some of those have happened. When companies have lied about their product, have not been totally transparent about the downside of a product, or who have been slow to respond to a realized negative. So being accountable, being transparent is part of how we reveal what the downside is. So back to your question, how do you enforce ethics? I think you enforce it by rewarding good behavior and walking away from bad behavior. I don't think we will ever pass any laws for corporate communications.
Mm-hmm. So a method of rewards and transparency, accountability are going to be key.
Right.
Kind of an inherent conflict between the short-term goals of business and some of the goals which, as a counselor, you're going to want to bring to the C-suite, which is to think long-term in terms of corporate image and adhering to higher ethical levels.
Right. Well, what you're asking is, how do you sustain a company's success, and that company's success relying very much on stakeholder opinion versus the short-term, what do I do this quarter? What yield do I report to my investors? And that tension is always there. I mean, company CEOs, the C-suite, the leaders, the CFO are under constant pressure to, what do I do this quarter? The stakeholders, starting with investors, do want to see a return now and a recovery now if they're in difficulty. And so that is there. But the CEOs who understand the game, who go back to Jim Collins' book on Built to Last or Moving from Good to Great, understand that this is a long-term perspective, and the focus is on not only the return for this quarter, but longer term. And how do we sustain the long-term deal with our stakeholders? How do we anticipate change? How do we beat the competition over the longer term? Ethics come into play there, but again, it's back to honesty and fair play.
Do you believe that ethical standards, I think we've touched on this a little bit, do they need to be a top-down approach, or do they need to be a bottom-up kind of grassroots movements within an organization? Or
Yeah. Well, the question is, where do ethics start? And ethics, I think, starts with each individual and the kinds of people that are hired into a company, either will sustain or detract from the ethical behavior that the folks at the top want. Yeah, the standard the acceptability, the behavior that's allowed has to start at the top. And it starts with the hiring process. And it has to be exemplified by the folks in the C-suite, or at the plant level, the plant manager, or at the sales level, the sales people in charge of sales. Production, the same thing. This is what we will do. This is what this company does. Here's how we have succeeded in the past. Here's what I pledge to do. Here are our company's commitment. The Johnson & Johnson credo. Putting those things out there and showing this is what we believe, and we'll back this up. If you don't believe this, it's not a good match for you, and you probably shouldn't be doing business with us or being an employee of ours. It starts at the top, becomes a mindset, becomes a mantra, becomes rewarded or discouraged within the organization. The commitment has to be expressed. I do believe that, and things like credos or our commitments for this year, or this we believe, this is our mission, the corporate mission, will put in some of that belief and language that says we care about people, we care about outcome, we will do no harm and try to leave things better than we found them.
What role do you see or influence does the media have on the contemporary practice of ethical decision-making in public relations?
Media are very important in this. Media are important because they are, I used to head up a program called Project Watchdog for the Society of Professional Journalists, which I've been active in for a number of years. And the idea there was you keep an eye on government, first of all, and also on other institutions, including business, to see what these institutions, government, are doing that impact ordinary people who have vulnerability, sometimes no recourse to being helped out of those vulnerabilities. So the media are important. Again, it's transparency. We're in a total open society and an open age of mass communication. Everybody is watching all the time. We not only need whistleblowers anymore, but we've got everybody watching, whether they're online blogging or they're in the news, the traditional news media that I was once in reporting. And does that raise the standard? Got to. When you see an Ernie Madoff, was his first name Ernie? Bernard Madoff. How quickly we forget. Madoff, with that sort of egregious bad behavior, you wonder, where were the watchdogs? Why didn't we see that earlier? And it just highlights that we depend on the media. We depend on reporters and outside observers to let us know when somebody has stepped across the moral, ethical line. And it's a good story when a newspaper reporter finds that somebody has stepped over the line, and so that's going to be news, and that's going to be impressive and effective.
I want to move the conversation a little bit to the topic of environmental communications, which is something you've been very active in for many years, and particularly get your view on the role of ethics in that particular type of public communication. It seems to me that going back over the years, environmental issues are one where, in talking more about the watchdog role, that the practitioners of public communication have really had their feet held to the fire when it comes to that issue. Do you think that's heightened the awareness of the ethical aspects of public communication when it comes to that issue?
Interesting question, Lee. Has greening, as I call it and others do, influence moral understanding, responsibility, and ethics? I'd say yes, from the standpoint that greening has a very strong social impact. But it's done something else. This idea of greening, of environmental development, has made communicators more aware of the economic impact of environmental responsibility. it's made those in the C-suite more aware of the economic impact of environmental accountability. So I've come to understand that what we're now calling corporate sustainability is the kind of the new umbrella over all of this. And I'll get back to how this plugs back into ethical or honest, fair behavior. Corporate sustainability, an idea that was developed originally as a government policy statement back in the late 80s, early 90s, now has, it seems to me, become a combination of economic / financial, social, and political accountability inside a company. And by that I mean that a company that looks at what is expected and now will be required with what's happening in Capitol Hill and in the States with regard to climate change and energy efficiency and energy accountability. Those recognitions now are driving what we have to do in the social area, social realm. So environment, energy, climate change have now pushed us to the point where we need to get involved in the politics of all of this. And it is in that place that we now get back to the ethical, moral, social accountability and performance. So it's an influence, the idea of environmental work and environmental effort inside a company.
In terms of energy, once again, you brought up the idea of an economic balance, and I wanted to bring it back to another point you made earlier about the role of government in corporate behavior. Do you see the larger social issues and decisions that need to be made in the environmental area on energy, on carbon, as opening the door for more government involvement, or and what is the role of a PR practitioner in helping to create a balance between government and private management of this issue? Yeah,
government is certainly pushing the envelope on this. In writing my book, Corporate Greening 2.0, I had some help from my environmental team looking at companies and how they are positioning themselves on climate change and sustainability. And it seemed to us that we were finding a few strategies which are responsive to your question. And those strategies of companies are first for the company to set some achievable but sometimes stretch goals for their own environmental and energy efficiency operations, to set their own goals. The second strategy, it seems to us, is to engage others, that is to collaborate with others to achieve those goals. And this means not only working with suppliers, such as Walmart has done, and influencing green suppliers internationally, but also collaborating with others outside who are stakeholders in the company, including environmental groups, social groups, investor groups, and others, in how this company rationalizes what it has to do to meet government requirements with what it must do in meeting its own economic or financial performance goals. So a third strategy, if I'm up to three strategies, is to be competitive and to beat the competition in this. This just kind of changes the game with regard to what the cost of products are, what the cost of materials are. It drives up the social acceptability requirements for some products, whether you're doing a vehicle that doesn't pollute, or whether you are putting products out there that are said to be green, packaged smaller, whatever. So the government requirements impact all of those things. At the same time, communications, communication strategy has to be to position the company with its stakeholders so that it is always reassuring stakeholders, creating stakeholders. Peter Drucker once said that, what's the number one job for company management, of corporate management? Peter Drucker says that, it's not to employ people, it's not even to make a product, or it's not even to make a profit. Number one job is to create customers. Without customers, none of the rest of it can happen. It seems to me the number one job of a company and its communications people is to create stakeholders in the success of the company, of the organization. And you do that through fair dealing, honesty, transparency, accountability, and strong financial performance.
One of the reasons I asked that, in your book you talked about a recent McKinsey & Company survey of corporate leaders, and they rank the economy, or rather the environment, and not the economy, as and sustainability, as you say, issues as the most important facing their companies, whereas public opinion still ranks the environment and global warming relatively low when you ask them about the most important issues. Do you think that C-suite leaders and corporate leaders are ahead of the curve of this and understanding what's going to be important in the years ahead?
You ask how C-suite leaders take a position. They take a position because they understand that there's an economic impact first on their company. Then there's a social impact. Then there's a political impact when something like climate change or global warming is out there. And as far as the public, they're looking at what do I have to pay for something, and is environmental concern. They almost think of the same thing. Corporate people think of the economic impact. Consumers, customers, investors are thinking about economic impact. At the corporate level, we realize we've got to get ahead of the game here. We've got to get ahead of the deal. We've got to find out what our competitors are doing. And suddenly, greening is at the top of the agenda, or high on the agenda, in the C-suite when it wasn't before, because now I've got energy involved. I've got the cost of what I have to have, the electricity, the power, plus what I put out there. What is my carbon footprint? Something I never had to think about before, I was not required to think about before. And so that's why it moved up in that McKinsey survey to very high, if not number one, high on the agenda. While out here in the public, you ask people, how do you feel about buying green or not buying green? In their mind is, I don't know, how much is it going to cost me? Can I get it for free? And I like the big box and not the little box, whatever. Those decisions are out there, and that's changeable. That changes all the time.
It's interesting that the common perspective may be that consumers are so in tune and care so much about environmental and green issues, and corporate executives don't. But what these surveys show is it's kind of the opposite. Even though they're both looking have to understand the economic impact of what's going on, it's interesting that the survey shows that in reality, corporate leaders may be more attuned to environmental issues and the impact of green sustainability issues, whereas the public is more focused on economic issues first.
Good example of that is the bill that's now on Capitol Hill, the cap and trade bill that's moving forward. Originally it was called the Climate Change Bill, and now it's the Energy and Security Act. How companies came together with environmental groups to take a position early on. Again, part of the positioning that we talk about in the book, and the formation of the U.S. Climate Action Partnership, USCAP, U.S. Climate Action Partnership, involving companies such as Duke Energy, Dow Chemical, DuPont, Florida Power and Light, and Environmental Defense, NRDC, all sitting down and figuring, okay, this thing is coming, what sort of commitments can we make? How much reduction in carbon emissions can we all agree on that will make sense? And those getting involved early, taking a stand, positioning the companies to be supportive of the right kind of regulation in order to give the companies some sort of certainty, more certainty about what they would have to comply with and what's achievable. See, it does show a social consciousness, but also shows a political awareness that you haven't seen to that extent before, where people involved very early on collaborating together toward getting the right kind of outcome. And the bill that has emerged from the Energy and Commerce Committee in the House reflects that input from the U.S. CAP.
Mm-hmm.
It's very close to what they said. Reduction of 2005 standards by 17% by 2020 of carbon emissions, or greenhouse gas emissions, is very close to what the U.S. CAP suggested.